Then we're going to go into the second question with you, Nick, which is from an agent. This one is with regards to improvements made to a property. So the question says, or the scenario rather, if a tenant installs an inverter in a property without the landlord's permission or knowledge, are they entitled to remove the inverter when the lease expires? So that's the first part of it. And then if the tenant leaves the inverter installed, are they then entitled to some form of compensation? So the question pretty much that's what it says. And then they want to sort of speak about if they do remove it and damage is caused, then who sort of has to pay for that damage?
Okay, so this deals with improvements to a property. Okay, now improvements to a property is a fairly complex area of law. Okay, because the idea of an improvement to a property is a very large question. All right, improvements to a property could be anything that you can think of. You know, someone paints a wall, could be deemed to be an improvement to a property, but someone putting a lift into a property is the same sort of thing. So the law in this area is fairly complex, and there are different types of improvements that can be made to a property that are necessary or luxurious, and the way that the law treats these things are different. But I'm not going to go through a full legal lesson on the different types and what happens in circumstances, because here we're dealing with something very specific, and that would be an inverter. Okay. Now, the other difficulty with this question is no two inverter setups are the same. Okay, and we don't know exactly how this inverter has been set up in this particular property. Okay? It may well be that there's an inverter. It's just an inverter on maybe a trolley that's brought into the property, and it's either got its own plug, or maybe they've taken steps to plug it into the mains in the circumstances. Which, if it's without the landlord's permission, it's got its own problems there, because it really should have been, and there needs to be a certificate of compliance, which is issued if that's been done. But notwithstanding, that's one way of doing it. And then obviously your higher end inverter systems, it may well be that the inverter system was somehow bolted into a wall or something like that. Okay, which is a slightly different way of doing it, because there's some affixment to the property in the circumstances. Okay. Generally, what the answer in these particular questions is, you'd look at the written lease agreement between the parties. So your standard lease agreements, any lease agreement with any weight behind it, has got specific provisions relating to what happens to these items when they are firstly how to install them. So generally it's going to have a clause which says you need permission from the landlord in order to do it, because there is an effect on their particular property and they have to get permission. And then clauses saying what happens at the end of the lease agreement if that permission has been given. Okay, so the first question, and because this is from an agent, you're going to have to look at your lease agreement. Your lease agreement is going to have specific provisions with what did you have to do to get it in, and what do you do in the circumstances where you need to get it out. Okay, the answer is going to be sitting in the lease, which says, well, there's compensation, there's not compensation, or the tenant has to remove it or not remove it in the circumstances. It does seem to me that this is something that can be easily removed, because the agent said, you know, the damage that can be done to the premises can be easily removed. So that seems to me to allude to the fact that this is something which is not endemically inserted into the premises. If it's a inverter on a rolling platform or whatever the case is, it can be easily removed from the premises. So in those circumstances, it seems pretty clear to me that it's not going to exceed to the landlord in the circumstances because of the easy nature of the removal. Okay. However, that might be dealt with in the particular lease agreement. What I do want to say in this, because they did ask, is the tenant entitled compensation for the inverter system? If it is something that's easily removed, okay, then again, the lease is going to deal with this. But if it's something that's easily removed, it's very unlikely the landlord's going to be entitled to keep the thing and demand compensation for it. Okay. Obviously, if you think practically, the difficulties with that in our law would be quite substantial, because a landlord could try and basically take anything that's inserted or taken into the property and then claim compensation in the circumstances and demand that the tenant leaves their stuff there. So there's a difficulty there. But if it happens to be an inverter which is inserted into the property and can't be removed without significantly damaging the property, okay, that the landlord owns, the answer might be different. Okay, because the tenant is not entitled to now take away things and damage the landlord's property in doing so. Then, the lease agreement will deal with these particular things, but from a common law perspective, there may be an ability for the landlord to say, no, actually, you can't remove this thing any longer, okay, because it will materially destroy the property that I own, and the landlord might actually be able to demand that it stays in the circumstances.
There you have it. So yeah, thank you very much.
Just a quick one. If you're leaving and you haven't paid rent, also just bear in mind that if it is a movable asset and it's on the property, the landlord can claim it under their hypothec. But I don't think that has much to do with this current scenario, but just something to bear in mind. There are situations where it can be claimed.
100%. So thank you for that one tip towards the end there, Bruno. And then that brings us to the end of today's episode, and we'll see everybody again next week with more questions and answers. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Cheers.